You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode at the Life Church campus today with a guest that I scrolled back through our emails to Rachel, her assistant, and was like, I sent you an email because you were on the first list of people I wanted to have on the podcast. And she replied, was like, can you send me an example of your podcast? I'm like, hasn't gone out yet. So we're 2 years in, and finally I get to sit down with you. Very busy man. Please welcome to the podcast, Mr. Bobby Gruenewald.
It's good to be with you, Mike. Sorry it took 2 years to get here.
No, I appreciate it. It makes me work a lot harder. And I was saying, you know, a lot of the podcasts I get, people ask me, how have you sat down with that person? I'm like, well, I just send emails constantly. So sorry, Rachel, blowing your email box up every new year. It's like, hi, I'm back. I'm still doing it. 116 episodes in. But no, I really appreciate it. I'm really, really glad to be in this space and, you know, to get you for a little bit of time and share your story. Obviously, we have the connection of going to SNU.
Right.
And, you know, obviously we're both not from Oklahoma. You're a U.S. born and raised, but tell us a little bit about that. Tell me a little bit kind of about where you grew up and then I guess how you ended up going to SNU.
Yeah, I grew up in Decatur, Illinois is where I grew up, so central Illinois. And I had absolutely no family, no connection whatsoever to Oklahoma growing up. Yeah. I just, you know, just one of those, it's another one of those states, you know, that I just wasn't, my family's all in Illinois at the time. But so I grew up, you know, kind of doing some interesting things. I got into being a rapper. So I was a Christian rapper for 5 years when I was in Illinois. And my wife, her name's Melissa, we actually met in the 4th grade. She's from Illinois as well. And we dated off and on in high school. And she was a year ahead of me in school. And so when she graduated, we had kind of talked about where we were going to go to college, and we were sort of planning that. And she surprised me by saying that she wanted to go to Oklahoma, come to Oklahoma and go to school at Southern Nazarene University. And we grew up in the Church of the Nazarene, so there's already a connection, kind of an affinity with the denomination, of course. But there's another Nazarene school that's really close, or much closer to us in Illinois. And so the presumption was that was kind of where we were going. And so at the time, I was a bit shocked by it, you know, and I still had to finish my senior year of high school. And so then I thought, okay, long distance relationship. And she's like, no, actually, I think we need to end this. So she broke up with me to go to college because she said, I just don't want to have a relationship. You know, I'm focused on school and I want to not have to focus on that. And so that was the excuse at least. But I found out that she actually had another guy that had been kind of courting her to come down to Oklahoma to come to school here. And so a couple weeks after she came, they were dating. And so my story is that my wife chased after another man to Oklahoma, and I chased after her, and that is how I ended up. Exactly. Now, that is how I ended up in Oklahoma. That is a true story.
That's awesome.
It was the only reason at the time, you know, I mean, not that the state's not a great state and the school's not a great school, but absent of coming and experiencing it, you know, I had no reference point other than the fact that I was pursuing my wife.
Right. What what time was this? What year was this?
So that would have been in the 1994-95. Okay. So when I actually came to school, I started in January of 1995.
Okay. So the bombing was in 95.
Yes, it was right after I got here, just a few months.
Yeah. What do you remember about that day?
Oh, I mean, I remember it vividly. I was at SNU, and I remember even the magazine I was reading. I was sitting in like a lounge in the business department reading a magazine when all of a sudden kind of heard something happen, and I walk out of the lounge, and several students were talking about it, and then by the time I got up to where the commons are at SNU, they had already had they had a TV that kind of played a projection TV in there, and they had flipped it over to the news and were starting to even show some of the early images. And so, it was just a horrible day. But and then we actually went down to see if we could help, and
Yeah.
several students did. And so we were there like right in the aftermath and kind of the sort of core area
Yeah.
of it before they really started to section it all off. But you never forget those particular
Right.
moments. And it was one of those times where, I mean, I'd only been here a few months, but you could obviously see the community really coming together. I think my wife and I went to the memorial service that Bill Clinton and everyone went to down at the fairgrounds or wherever it was. And so, I remember a lot about that experience, but it happened just 3 months or 4 months after I came to Oklahoma.
Yeah, because you kind of from that experience, you get to really see how the people are, how they react, who they really are, especially coming from up north, right? Totally different culture.
Sure.
And then you come to Oklahoma, it's kind of the same thing. Nothing's happened, thankfully, since I've been here, but, everyone's just so great. Everyone will drop anything to do anything for you. Do you go home that summer?
I was home that summer, and so that was kind of the rhythm, for college was we'd be back home during the summer and then, back here for school. But it's one of those things you mentioned, the people in Oklahoma. It's something you definitely notice when you come from up north. I grew up in, what's not Chicago area. Chicago's a little bit more rough and tough. I have I have family that live up there, and I've certainly been there many, many, many times. But where I was at, it was farm community or smaller town in central Illinois where agriculture and grain processing, and it's called the soybean capital of the world, where all that's going on. So it's a little different, but I had kind of, I'd say, Midwestern values growing up. Families, very, very family-oriented culture. But here it's got kind of this blend of Midwestern values where family is still, real central to everything. But then just the overall demeanor, the way people were so polite, people very friendly, kind of out of their way to be friendly. That's the thing you notice when you first come, from somewhere else.
It comes across really strong, doesn't it? And it's kind of like, why are you being so nice to me? I had kind of the similar experience. For me, I was my second day here. Me and my dad went, on 39th, went to Ann's Chicken Fry for dinner. And me and my dad sat there, quite strong accents at the time. And this lady just leans across. She's like, "Where are you from? Why are you here?" Tell her the story and tell her the dad's leaving in a couple of days. She's like, slides me a number. She's like, "If you need anything ever, just let me know." I'm like, that's really strange.
One
but
thing
now I totally understand it.
Yeah, well, if you're in Oklahoma and have an English accent, though, you're just, it's like you can ask for anything. So they're going to go for that for sure. So, no, we actually, we definitely love the people and love the culture, but I didn't come anticipating that I was going to stay, not because I had a negative perception of Oklahoma. I just had no particular perception and no, like I said, no relationships. My wife is only here for school. Apparently that other guy initially, but school. And so I think the general presumption was that, well, we'll go to school here and graduate, and then we'll probably move either back to Illinois, probably to a larger city than what we grew up in, because that was, I think, part of our aspirations. We'd considered Dallas, but for the most part, it was just presumed that when we graduated, that was what we were going to do.
So you said kind of in high school you were in a Christian rap group. Was music quite a big influence as well still while you were in college?
Not as much, because I think what happened sort of simultaneously was when I came here, it was after I'd already sort of won my wife back, and we had begun, because we had dated so long, we already began to talk about plans for marriage while we were in college. Yeah. And the concept of her being a lifetime groupie for a Christian rapper wasn't really something that she felt called to and wanted to do. So I felt like I needed to probably transition from that. So I've always loved music, and music is definitely a part of who I am. But in terms of professionally or from a career perspective, that transition really happened when I came to college. I was a business major. That was sort of a transition point for me to say, okay, the music thing was great. It's what I was supposed to be doing at the time. I'll always appreciate it, and I'm sure I'll have musical kind of talent or things that'll be woven into me. But in terms of like a career path and all of it, that really ended or stopped, when I got here. So
when did kind of like, I guess, because, you're in college, mid-90s to late 90s, that's where pretty much tech really started to kind of come on the scene, right? Was that just an instant draw to you? You all, just kind of like, I want to be involved in this?
Yeah, so technology has always been something since I can remember as a kid that I was interested in. I never thought about like building a career around it, but I always liked to use it. I was blessed because my parents we didn't have a lot growing up. We certainly didn't act like we had a lot. My dad's very, very frugal. I mean, he found out later in life he saved a lot of money, but I thought we were poor, growing up based on his the way he would not spend it.
Yeah.
But one single thing that he really kind of broke the bank to spend money on was to get our family a computer. And it was like, I remember it was sort of a really high-end, very expensive purchase for my parents, very unusual.
Yeah.
But it was important to them that we had this computer so that we could learn from it. So I felt very blessed and privileged that at a very young age I kind of had access to that, when a lot of people that were my friends, they had a lot of other things, toys and everything else, but they didn't have a computer.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that probably drew me in my interest level more, because curiosity has always been an attribute of mine. So I was always kind of curious and would explore and try to learn how things worked. When I got to college, like I said, I was a business major, finance major in particular, and I had some roommates, and not roommate, but a neighbor of mine in the dorm that was really into the internet, kind of back when it was a little more of that underground thing that no one really knew much about.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of what sort of connected me a little bit more to it, because I would be in his dorm and just kind of see what he was doing and begin to have more interest in it at that time.
Did you have any kind of part-time jobs while you were in college?
Yeah, I did actually. I had a job that was part-time at Steve Bailey Honda. Okay. I had a couple of part-time jobs actually, but the one more notable one was I was working at a car dealership. At that time, it was located there in Bethany, really just down the road from the university. And so it was close to the university, which made it convenient. And it was, I think it paid like $6 an hour. It was a back office job. It wasn't selling cars, but it was like supporting the car salesman with some software, just some things, back office type application they were doing. It, quite frankly, it was a very, very boring job. It was date money. It was really the function of it. But it is something that led me into what I'm doing today, which was what's interesting about it is because I was bored, I would listen in to conversations in the car dealership, just looking for, I don't know, just something to do. And one group from California came in and pitched Mr. Bailey and the dealership on building a website for him. This is in 1995. So it would have been just in the fall after I came, because I would have come January that year. So this would have been, I don't know, October, November. And so I listened in the conversation, and I went up to Mr. Bailey after the conversation. I didn't really know him. I don't really talk to the owner, very often or at all for me. And I just said, Mr. Bailey, if you'll let me build a website for you, I'll do it for $100.
Yeah.
And he had just heard a proposal that I think was like $2,200, from this group. And so he looks at me, he's like, sure.
Yeah.
And the problem was I had absolutely no idea how to build a website. And that was...
and no YouTube university to
and
be
there
able
was
to learn how to do it.
No books on it. I mean, there was no websites on how to build websites back in 1995. So it was a challenge though. And so I thought, okay, I'll talk to my friend. He understands more about this. And so little by little, I'd pick up enough knowledge. And then Christmas break was coming soon for school. So during that Christmas break, I went through and dedicated a lot of time during break to kind of work on building this site, and came back and showed it to them. And they liked it. It was very simple, but that's kind of what was being proposed. And I just said, I think we could actually build a different website that you might do a better job of selling things on, because you're not going to buy cars in 1995 on the internet. I said, but I think we could sell parts and accessories. And so we built a website called HondaParts.com and did it there just out of the back office of the car dealership. Yeah. And within a few months, it grew to where they were selling, I think it was hundreds of thousands of dollars in parts all through this website. And he called me in his office one day, and he just said, what do you plan on doing in life? And before I had a chance to answer, he said, whatever it is that you're going to do, I want to invest in it.
That's so cool.
And so I had this huge opportunity had not anticipated this, wasn't planning on being an entrepreneur,
Right.
but felt like that was the right next step for me. And so I had this crazy opportunity to be an entrepreneur, and I had an investor before I even had an idea.
Yeah.
Which is obviously typically a little bit backwards, but that really led me to kind of process and think about what would I do, what could we do. I have this huge opportunity. And so I got with some friends, and we put together a business plan to build a web hosting company was what we started with. So that was really, that part-time job was a catalyst that led me into the entrepreneurial space, which then I spent the next few years really working and had some early success in that in the late 90s during kind of a season that was really a great time to be kind of starting in tech.
Yeah. Is Mr. Bailey still around?
To my knowledge, he is still around. I went to lunch with him not too long ago, and I haven't talked to him very recently, but he's an amazing man, and just very, very thankful for him, because he just had a huge impact on my life. He became my first investor. He and one of his friends was also in the auto business, a guy named Jerry Richardson, who's another car dealer in town. Dub Richardson was the name of their car dealership. And the two of them became our first investors. And then the second, we sold that company about a year and a half later. And the second company that we had, we took on another, them plus a little bit larger local investment group for it. But yeah, it was very fortunate to have, when you have somebody like him that's just a great businessman, just a great person that believes in you when you're, I guess I would have been 19 years old, probably at the time. That's a big deal. There's not too many 19-year-olds that have somebody that says, I actually want to invest money in whatever it is that you come up with,
right?
Which is a bit of a crazy thing. I mean, but I think that's the opportunity people miss a lot of times that are in business, is just the impact that they can have just by believing in people. To me, that's also really true to the spirit of people here in Oklahoma in general. I mean, there's the entrepreneurial spirit, which obviously Mr. Bailey had, because he kind of self-made, he's a self-made man with his business. But then just that notion that you're going to take some risks on people, you're going to believe the best in people. I think those attributes really carry through our culture. But that is also the reason one of the key reasons I ended up staying was because all of a sudden now I had this business and didn't anticipate this, but this was kind of an anchoring point. And my wife also got offered a great job at Chesapeake Energy while she was still in college. And so both of those things combined kind of said, maybe we should just stay.
Yeah, at least for a few years.
At least for a while, and just see what happens.
Yeah. What pushed you to the dealership to get a job? Do you have a huge passion for cars, or is it just they were just advertising and just right time?
This is a crazy story that I've pretty much never told, I don't think, but I'll tell you because since you kind of asked the question. Yeah, no, it's so I actually applied for a mailroom job at Chesapeake that paid $10 an hour. And back when I was in college, $10 an hour job was like a really good paying job. They were a great company. It was very, very small but growing. So I applied for a mailroom job. And when I went to apply for the job and they were looking at my resume, they said, man, you're a finance major, and I had a good GPA and all this. And they said, you should apply for our audit internship. And I'd had a lot of accounting classes as well. And I said, well, I mean, okay. I mean, what's an audit internship look like? And they said, oh, well, I mean, it'd be a much better job for you. You're kind of overqualified for this mailroom job. So let's get you on the audit internship role. So they took me right over to talk to who, I don't know if her title was the treasurer at the time. She ultimately became the treasurer at Chesapeake. Went right into her office. Of course, I had not prepped for this interview. I didn't come plan for this job. In fact, two of my friends were actually, I found out, applying for the same internship, and they were much more qualified because they were accounting majors and they were this is like in their wheelhouse. So the long story short is I didn't get the job. The audit internship.
And somebody else got the mail job.
Yeah, but I could have got the mail job, but I didn't. So it was actually getting rejected by Chesapeake that caused me to say, well, I just need a job. Yeah. And so it was the only one I found that was available, and it paid $6 an hour. So I got paid a lot less. to go work because I was overqualified for the job that I could have got paid more at. It's just kind of an interesting diamond. That's actually where my wife ended up getting her first job at Chesapeake. So the whole kind of way it all fits together is really fascinating. That would have. I'm glad I got rejected, quite frankly, because I would have been trading a $10 job for what became an opportunity of a lifetime.
Yeah.
And that was such a better trade.
And you go from like potentially working in the office, nice setting, to like working in an auto dealership in the 90s, which is completely different to what it is today, right? The stories you hear was completely different, which we don't have to go into.
It was definitely less professional of an environment, but I will say the dealership was well run. But it was it was different. I mean, a car dealership environment is different than a oil and gas company, and so for sure.
So Mr. Bailey says, on whatever you're in on next, I want to be your investor. What, and you and your buddies, what are the next businesses that you and your buddies start? Do you start these while you're still in college? I assume?
Yeah, so we started the first company, the web hosting company, while we were in college, and we still had a full year. I still had a full year of school left, and so it was a crazy start. I mean, I got married, I started a business, I had one more year of school left. I was the president of what's called a business gaming team at SNU. That's is a big deal because we had won the national competition 3 years in a row, and now I was the president of it, and we're like going for a four-peat.
Yeah.
So there's like all this pressure that we needed to win again. That took a ton of time. So I had all these, like, basically a recipe for disaster of like, don't do all these things at once. So I would basically not sleep. I'd sleep maybe 2 or 3 hours at most in a given night. The weekends were the only time that I might find a little bit of rest, and that was just what life was like. Work, you go to school full time. I think I was doing 18 or 20 hours. So it was a full load plus the job, but it was awesome. And we started at the very beginning before we could get an office set up and we could get, a lease done and servers, because there's a bit of time to ramp up and we didn't want to wait. So we found some ways to go and get started while we're in our dorm room. We found an empty dorm room, asked the resident advisor if we could use that dorm room as our office. And they were like, as long as you don't get me in trouble, sure. And we used the phone line in that dorm room as our office phone.
Yeah.
And we literally leaned out the window with an answering machine because we didn't want it sounding like you're inside of a dorm room recording an answering machine message. And we would just basically make it sound like we were always busy on the other line. And the truth was, no one's ever in that dorm. We just would go up and check. We just go check the answering machine to see what calls came in. Our first customer was from Germany. I'll never forget being there in the dorm watching a fax come through on the computer from a contract from Germany for our first client. And then we grew to have customers in 33 countries over the next year and a half.
Wow.
We had no idea what we were doing. We were 19 or 20-year-old college kids, and we're having to provide tech support to Japan, which is in the middle of the night, our time. Just everything about it made no sense whatsoever as far as like the most unlikely, group of people to be successful at doing it. But it was one of those things of the timing and what was happening. We were one of probably only 20 companies that were focused on web hosting in the entire world. And that's not like sort of an exaggeration. Like at that time, people that said, I'm a web hosting company, not like it's like sort of a side business for us. We could only find 20. And back then you could pretty well find everything because the internet was pretty small.
Yeah.
And so we just were at a really early stage, and it turned out to be a great thing. It wasn't like as big of a home run for the investors and us as it would have been if we had waited to sell it maybe a year.
Oh,
it
really?
would have maybe been worth almost 20 times as much a year later because we had sold it like a regular business instead of like the .com craziness that happened. But the second company I started with a different partner after we sold that, and we acquired the largest professional wrestling website and grew it. Sold it to a company that Goldman Sachs took public in December of 1999. And so that particular venture was definitely more in line with the types of deals that you saw happening during that time frame. Yeah,
so you learned a lot from that first business.
Sure, we made so many mistakes. I mean, we had probably not a great structure. We didn't have a great structure to how we organized it. I just grabbed as many partners and friends as we could to start it. it really, you just learn a lot about, there's so many mistakes that were made. It's kind of embarrassing that we even survived.
Does kind of the same group of friends go into the next business or not?
No,
They just moved on?
we had some stayed with the company that we sold it to. Some before we even had sold it had already graduated and started to move on with grad school or some different directions that they went in life. So no, the second business I actually started with one of my customers from the first business, and he became the partner in the second one. But it was the same investors plus additional investors. So the investors followed us into the next thing, but the team looked a little different, mainly because of stage of life. People getting married. There's just a lot of people going different directions.
Yeah, and so you go through the second one, you sell the second one, and then how quickly does like the Life Church opportunity come around? Because that was 2003, right?
No, it was actually in 2001 when I officially started Life Church. But we sold the company December of 99. In 2000, or right, maybe it had been the same year, right around the time of the sale of the company, an article came out in the newspaper about the sale of the company and had my picture in it. And I had been attending Life Church and serving on the worship team, playing keyboard as a volunteer during the year there in 1999. My wife and I moved to Northwest Oklahoma City from Yukon, where our first house was. And when we did, we looked for a church that was near where we lived, found Life Church, fell in love with it. And so when the article came out in the paper, the executive pastor at the church said, "Isn't that the guy that plays keyboard on the worship team?" I just had never talked about what I did in business. And so he went to lunch with me, and at that lunch just asked what I planned on doing next, and then even asked if I'd ever considered doing what I was doing in business with technology and using that on staff at a church, because Life Church was very progressive and trying to reach people that other people weren't reaching, and trying some things that others weren't doing. And there was no technology really to speak of at Life Church at that time, but they saw technology as a potential tool that could be used to reach people. So at the lunch, he asked if I might consider it. I actually said no.
Too busy.
And I just, I loved my church, and I was afraid that if it became my job, that I might not love it.
Yeah.
And that's really what was going through my mind. So instead I said, what if I just volunteered in other ways? Because I had no idea that the church even was interested or needed these things. So that's what I began to do for the course of the next year. I went from a part-time thing to almost 40-hour-a-week volunteer capacity role. And it became real clear to me that my purpose in life, that what I felt like God was calling me to do was to take this step. It was unexpected, but to step on staff at the church. So I did that in 2001. If you'd have asked me at that time, I probably would have anticipated staying on staff for 18 months or 20 months, because almost everything I'd done up to that point had a lifespan of about that long on it. I was young and just restless, a lot of times ready for the next challenge. But God kind of had a different plan, and here I am, 19 years later, and love every bit of it. It's been a difficult, challenging journey because it's not easy work. However, it's been the most rewarding thing that I could ever be a part of, just because it's not just a great place to work, but the impact we're making in people's lives has just been really cool to be a part of.
Yeah, definitely. And I was recently, and we'll get onto this as well, I was recently looking at just like watching the numbers of downloads just continue to climb. It is unbelievable. But so when the iPhone comes out, right, and you see these like apps, right, what are you thinking at that time? What is that time in your career and life? Like, where are you at that point?
Yeah, so I've been on staff at the church at that time for a little more than 5 years, and my first official role at the church was not really technology related. I mean, I was initially solving some problems with like just basic stuff, like we had no infrastructure, no computers, et cetera, that we, just really nuts and bolts types of stuff. But my first real title, I think, was new campus development leader. So my job was to sort of start new locations for the church. That whole strategy around that, I was real involved in that, which kind of fit my personality because it was very startup kind of oriented. Yeah. But it wasn't technology oriented really. And so in 2006, and even 2005, begin to really process like why that journey through business and through technology, and there had to be more that I learned in that would really apply missionally to what we do at the church. And that led to several ideas, few of which we do today that are fairly notable. One is what we call Church Online, which is basically connecting people to people using technology. And we have people from all over the world that participate in many different church services every week using that technology. And the other was the YouVersion Bible app, which was at the time an idea in October that I had related specifically to the fact that I read the Bible less than I wanted to. I was less engaged than I felt like I should be and wanted to be. So I thought there's got to be a way technology could help me connect with the Bible more consistently. And because I knew there's a lot of people like me. And I thought, so if it could help me, it could help others. So we started with an idea for a website. And this was right around the time that the iPhone came out. But at first, when the iPhone came out, there were no apps that you could install or an app store or any of that. It was just like a really out there new concept for a phone. And so that was in 2007, and we were just simultaneously launching this website called YouVersion with kind of a novel idea about how the website would connect you to Scripture. Well, it turns out that the website failed. The iPhone didn't, and we were going to shut the website down. But we always like to learn from failure, and one of the things that we felt like we learned was that we were using our computers less and less. Yeah. And back then, your computers weren't really mobile; they were more like a true desktop. Yeah. Laptops are pretty rare, but we were using our BlackBerries, and iPhones all the time. I mean, BlackBerries were called crackberries back then because they were so addictive. You'd answer your email, you'd kind of live with them day and night on your hip. It was just a really phenomenon in terms of the technology advancement. And so we thought, well, what if we just redesigned the website so that it would display in a BlackBerry? Because that was the predominant smartphone at the time. Yeah. This is late 2007, early 2008. And so that's what we did, and it was profound how just that one simple change changed how we engaged with the Bible, and it changed how like the traffic to the website we could see going up from people using their BlackBerries. So then it was right at that moment in 2008 when we were seeing kind of those results come in that Steve Jobs announced that they were now going to make it possible to develop apps for the iPhone and create something called an app store, which was really the revolutionary concept at the time. As common as it is today, back then, even though you could get mobile apps for certain kinds of phones, but it was so clunky and how you got them and whether they worked or not and what you had to pay for them and all that stuff is just such a mess that this really solved that problem. And so we just thought, well, based on what we see, we should try to develop YouVersion into an app, or the Bible into an app, and see if Apple would accept it. So that's what we did. We had a guy on our team that was 19 that loved Apple, and nobody else knew how to build apps, so we just asked if he could figure it out. And it was kind of the wild, wild west back then. There were, again, no tools, no books, no classes, no coding dojos, no...
Kind of like what you'd done with the Honda website.
Yeah, it was just a complete blank slate of unknowns. You had no idea how many apps there would be, no idea if it'd be successful, because tech companies back then would try all kinds of things that didn't work, and they still do today. But we managed to get the app approved, and the day that the App Store launched in July of 2008, the Bible app was in the first 200 free apps that were available that day. And it blew our minds that it made it into the store, quite frankly. And then it blew our minds that there were only 200 free apps, because we would have presumed thousands. And what that did was it gave us this really strong first mover advantage, not like necessarily first mover for Bibles, but just first mover for apps, where all these eyeballs were pointed in the same spot. We had 83,000 people install it from Thursday night to Sunday morning, and we had no idea that was possible. Blew our minds. And then it's kind of been off to the races, since then. I mean, it's one of those stories where you just don't know at first, but we're just kind of lucky that it hit, all in that moment. But that was kind of the end of it, or is this like the beginning of a big wave, and we're going to try to, ride it as long as we can? And, here we are, I guess 11 years later, and it's just been remarkable because 83,000 has grown to 410 million, and grown by almost 4 or 5 million new devices per month. And I mean, never I would have thought that was possible. Yeah, it's just kind of hard to get your mind wrapped around. I mean, I still can't, and most people that use it even today would still have no concept that it's happening in so many languages. Like when you see it in English, that people actually experience the same thing in Arabic with the app right to left instead of left to right. And there's so many attributes and aspects to it that are kind of unknown. But it's all happened, of course, step by step over time. But still blows our minds. Yeah,
and you get to have a moment like, I guess, giving the Pope at the time an iPhone with it.
Yes,
right? Tell me about that. Is that kind of one of the halo moments?
Yeah, I had an opportunity to visit with Pope Francis, and I presented him with a gold iPhone that had the Bible app on it, of course, and then I tell people for fun, I say, I actually have the Pope's cell phone number, but of course I gave him the cell phone. I did keep the number, so I made sure it was set up on an Italian SIM card. But anyway, no, it was a great experience. I mean, obviously it was a bit surreal in that the Catholic Church is actually really sees really the value of Bible engagement. And so I just thought it was a really cool opportunity for us to have a conversation about that. And then I met with the Pontifical Council for Social Communication, which is a really cool name for a committee or whatever. And we talked a bit more about ways we could work together.
Yeah. Is there anything else that stands out just over the last 11 years that are just kind of like crazy moments? Like, I'm sure there's a ton, right? But like,
oh man, there's so it's really. It's honestly very humbling to be a part of it because we feel like we're just stewarding this, like it's not something we own. We may technically, the church owns it, however we just don't feel like it's ours. Like we just feel like it's our responsibility to kind of manage.
It's a resource that you manage.
It's a resource that we manage. But we've seen the reach of it just reach into all facets of life, from people that are very influential in entertainment and sports. I mean, it'll just sound like I'm name dropping if I start listing names off, because the truth is it's affected a lot of people, even here locally. Last year, I was at a game and met with Russell Westbrook, who said he uses the app every day. Yeah. As an example that maybe connects here to Oklahomans. Of course, a little different now with him, being at Houston, but still we love Russell. And,
of course, yeah.
And that's he's an example of somebody that you're like going, so there's an app we created many, many years ago, and here somebody with his notoriety says they use it every day.
Yeah, and actually like tells you as well, not just like you don't just share this through other people. Like he's like, no, I appreciate it. Like I use it.
Absolutely. And at the same time I was there, MC Hammer was there that night, and of course he uses the app, all the time. So there's just all these. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm just dropping a bunch of names. The truth is, it blows our minds the level of impact that it has, and the number of people that's impacted. But when you have 410 million devices that have installed it, you're going to have quite a few interesting stories that are kind of contained inside of it. And
I think like obviously everyone uses it, but they don't. Faith and Christ's life in the media isn't shown as much as it should be, right? And like you have Steph Curry and stuff like that talking about it openly, and people kind of get a strange reaction to it when it's spoken about openly because they don't hear it that often.
Sure.
But it's great when you have an athlete like that. When people follow you on Instagram and they see you post a picture with Kanye West, right? And they're like, okay, that's really cool. I want to know, did you rap for Kanye West?
I did not rap for Kanye.
Oh, that would have been.
I was asked to rap for him. We were in a restaurant together, and we wanted to know if I could rap, but I declined I didn't want to do it in the restaurant. I would have done it for him, like in his house or something, but I don't want to do it in the restaurant for some reason. But
in public.
No, well, it's just obviously it's Kanye. So he but he said that the Bible app is his favorite app.
Yeah.
He posted that on Twitter a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and says he reads it every day, every morning. What's interesting is he actually, when I talked to him, he actually doesn't use the app. He uses Bible.com, our website, on his iPhone. He's one of the few people I know that doesn't. He said he doesn't do a lot with apps. He actually uses websites more than apps because I think he switches phones a lot and does different things. But anyway, yeah, it was great. Connect with him. We're talking about ways we might be able to work together because he's got a lot of passion right now for the Bible and for really just for ministry in general. He's really viewing his life and what he's trying to realign what he does, all shaped around ministry. But you're right about culture. Faith used to be very central point of conversation of culture and community. It was part of the city conversation in most communities around here in Europe and different parts of the world. And it did kind of move to the periphery, sometimes literally to the periphery in the suburbs, like in terms of the churches themselves, but probably more metaphorically, it's kind of moved to, outside, of the conversation. And we really view that as something that we want to change. And there's no particular reason that it couldn't be. These people that, like I mentioned, that use our app that happen to be famous people, they're real people. They have the same kinds of struggles that you and I have. Their lives are certainly different, and they have different sets of pressures and expectations. But at the core, they're still people and human beings, and they turn to they turn to the Bible and they turn to God's Word as a source of inspiration, a source of truth when they're trying to kind of find truth in the midst of a world that seems like it's full of a bunch of non-truth, or a bunch of uncertainty. And so that's, I think, what's encouraging is that actually is happening. I think it's encouraging for them to share about it more, and I think we're trying to encourage that to happen. And we've created a lot of video segments and contents of people that have a lot of influence that talk about their fondness for the Bible, in part because we want people to see that this is not some obscure, very narrow-minded group of people that kind of turn to God's Word, that it's actually a very mainstream thing that real people that they look up to, admire, who aren't perfect, and none of us are, still, and regularly see God's Word as kind of an anchoring, a source of to turn to kind of in the midst of the craziness, that's out there in the world. So we're trying to help paint the picture of reality for people, because we think there's a very narrow and kind of incomplete picture that's painted by sometimes by the media or just by the way cultural pressures, kind of try to remove this from the conversation. So we're trying to make sure it stays elevated.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are doing a great job of a huge team here, and just the impact that you've had and will continue to have. It's really cool to kind of sit with you. I'm going to finish with some quick fire questions.
Okay.
They're not super quick fire, but they are a little bit. Favorite song at the moment?
Oh, I'd have to pick a Kanye song off his new album, but I'm trying to think. Use This Gospel. I'll use that one.
Do you have a favorite song of all time?
No.
Last person you saw live in concert?
Oh, it's been a while since the concert. Next. I'm trying to remember. I'll come back to that one.
This is going to be a hard one. Most famous person you've ever met, and that's like you to define this. So who did you like geek out over?
I would say the person that impacted me the most when I met them, who's famous, would be Billy Graham.
Okay.
I met the Pope, I met the president, multiple presidents, but Billy Graham would probably be the one that stands out.
Football or basketball?
Basketball.
Favorite meal?
Favorite meal, probably Thai.
Favorite restaurant in Oklahoma?
That's too difficult, man.
It is.
I'm going to offend too many of my friends that are restaurant tours by picking one.
Go to Starbucks order.
I usually go with a non-fat latte.
Okay. If there was no tech industry, what would you be doing?
Riding a horse.
Riding a horse?
Well, just because if there's no tech industry, that's probably what I'd be left doing.
To that point, you're a pilot.
I am.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Recent pilot. Yeah. No, I decided in July last July that I wanted to learn to fly. So I kind of look for lifetime learning challenges, and this is one of them. So yeah, I'm a pilot, and I got instrument rated, and before Christmas, which means I can fly in clouds and weather and all that. And then this week I started helicopter lessons, and I've had 2 so far.
Okay. So happy days. Yeah. Finish on this one. Dream vacation.
Oh, dream vacation. I feel like I have those all the time. So I would say I'll just pick the one I'm doing this summer is a kind of an epic trip. It's like a work trip combined with a vacation. So I'm taking my entire family, which is what I try to do now as much as I can, take my wife or kids on trips with me, which is like my favorite thing to do. And I do a lot of international travel for speaking or for sharing the story. So this summer we'll go to Scotland, then Israel, then Ghana, Africa for there's 3 different events that I'm speaking at, and then we'll be in the Mediterranean on a boat, and then into London, where my parents and my wife's parents are coming over to go to a Cardinals and Cubs baseball game in London.
Oh, really?
So that'll be a 3-week kind of epic trip with the whole family.
That's awesome.
And like several different countries. So I think just the adventure of all of the distinction, each of those countries are very, very different.
Right.
I think I'm really looking forward to it. So it may turn out to be the worst vacation ever, but right now I'm planning for it to be the best. Is
that National Lampoon's European Vacation, something like that?
Well, my last name is Gruenewald, and everybody abbreviates it Griswold sometimes, so it fits right in there with that National Lampoon stuff.
Well, mate, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a super busy man, and thanks for sitting down and being on the show. I'm sure the listeners really appreciate getting to know you a little bit better, and I'm sure everyone knows that you already rap because that's on your Wikipedia page. But congrats on the flying, and wish you all the best for flying a helicopter soon as well.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So thank you, Mike, for the opportunity. I appreciate being on here.
Appreciate it. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll catch you next episode. Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.